Great. On. That better? All good. So I wanted to speak to you on Psalm 23. Now, this is something you were so familiar with. In fact, if you think about this, this is a poem that's really stood the test of time, isn't it? This was probably written 3,000 years ago. I wonder, and I do not know, if it is one of the best known pieces of the Bible. I wonder if it's one of the best known pieces of the Bible. It will be in over 1,000 different languages that people will have this piece of poetry. And it stood over 3,000 years. And if you asked people if they knew anything, I reckon it would be this and the Lord's Prayer are probably the most common two things that someone who's perhaps got some semblance of Christian faith would know. It's fascinating, isn't it? Out of all of the Psalms, it's this one. And out of all of this book, this is one of the things that so many people know. But a lot of them know about it, but they might not know how to speak truly personally to that shepherd or understand who that shepherd is. So we want to have a little bit of a deep dive into this psalm. I'm going to read it. So you're really familiar with it. You can close your eyes if you want to, but we're going to read this psalm. The Lord is my shepherd. I lack nothing. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He refreshes my soul. He guides me along the right paths for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil. For you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely your goodness and love will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Forever. What a poem. What a lot of promises. Isn't that somebody who really knew our God, who wrote that down 3,000 years ago? And as we know, it was written by a shepherd. He certainly understood shepherding, didn't he? He understood shepherd. And I love it that it's not just a list of attributes of God in a dry format. The reason this is lived is it's poetry. It's a picture. We can see it, we can understand it, we can comprehend it so much better because it's not just a list of things about God. It's written by someone who was known as the friend of God. He was known as the friend of God. I was in, where was I? Somewhere in near Bristol. And one of my old youth group friends was also there. I was with the Baptists, that area of Baptist church leaders. And he shared with me a link to my baptism, which was great. That was in Thundersley Gospel Hall many, many years ago. And that you get the little testimony bit first. And I simply said about Jesus being my friend. And he's my friend, and I want to introduce him, my best friend, to lots of other people. So, and I was like, oh, yeah, it's sort of still would be how I would describe my best friend, and I want to introduce him to many others. And I think if you got to David at the end of his life, even all the different things that he'd done, I think he'd still be saying, yeah, he's my shepherd. I knew him on the hills. I've known him in the battles. I've known him when I've been an exile, out hiding in caves. I've known him through all the ups and downs. He's been my shepherd. He's been my shepherd. You could hear that terminology, can't you, of David as he's going to be with the Lord forever, saying, he's been my shepherd all the way through, beginning to end. And I think that's why it's so vibrant, isn't it? It was written by a shepherd who then needed those shepherding skills. If you're going to shepherd people, it's a term we get in the New Testament, isn't it? Shepherd, for leadership. And he was shepherding a kingdom. And he needed the same skills as he needed for sheep as he needed for people. And God has those same skills that he needs to look after, to be our shepherd. Have any of you watched Clarkson's Farm? Yeah. Well, Darren and I find it difficult to find things to watch. This is one of those compromise things, and we both end up watching, if we are going to watch anything together, it'll end up being Clarkson's Farm, because we have such different tastes in TV. So we are watching, did you watch, he's a pig herd now, isn't he? But it's close. He did a bit of shepherd, but now he's trying his hand at pigs. I don't know if you saw the night one of their favourite pigs was giving birth to piglets, and they're out there and it's freezing cold, and they're cold, and it's all just a bit dire, and they're trying to pull piglets out of the pig, and it's all a bit dramatic. Anyway, eventually they get all these piglets out of the pig, and they're absolutely exhausted, so they think they'll just go to bed now. So they leave the pig and the piglets, and then they come back the next day, and 3 of those piglets have died because the mother has sat on them. So they didn't do a very good, anyone who'd been a good pig herd would have known that they left too soon. And they probably would have done, it's 24, shepherding, this shepherd in the Bible is a 24/7 shepherd. Did they go, I'm a bit tired now? Yeah, we've done enough, I think, we've done enough. Everyone looks okay, let's go to bed. Let's just leave the scene. Do you see? It's a very different shepherding, isn't it? And of course, it's Middle Eastern shepherding. You know that, don't you? Middle Eastern shepherding, how can we put it? It's an immersive experience. You lived with the sheep. You never, ever left them. You slept with the sheep. You ate with the sheep. You talked to the sheep. You smelt like a sheep. The whole thing was sheep. And whereas now it's like, well, leave them up on there. If we lose 1 or 2, it's not the end of the world. They're up on a hill. It's like, we'll get them down at some point. We chase them around with jeeps and dogs and probably terrify the life. This is an entirely different type of shepherd. This is the good shepherd. And we all know that whose name that good shepherd is, don't we? This whole psalm, as we know, is actually pointing to the good shepherd. And Jesus, when he speaks in John 10, and he turns to people and he says, I am the good shepherd. Absolutely everybody in his audience, Psalm 23, because he was speaking into that audience, they would have immediately gone, oh my word, Jesus is claiming to be this shepherd, Psalm 23 shepherd, boom, boom, because they'd have known instantly. And that's what he was doing. He was saying, this psalm is all about me. Jesus is this shepherd. And he says, I am the good shepherd, and probably some of you will know that next line, who lays down his life for the sheep. Who lays down his life for the sheep. It's an entirely different type of shepherding. It's an entirely different type of shepherding, who lays down his life for the sheep. Jesus, who came to lay down his life for the sheep. But we're going to have a little dig a bit more into this. So first of all, Jesus is someone who provides for us. Our God is a provider. He says green pastures. Now, if you think about the Middle East, is green the word that would come to your imagination for those fields? This is more Cumbrian, isn't it? Or perhaps anywhere at the moment. We've had quite a lot of rain. You need rain, don't you, for the green fields. And so he's actually saying this is a place of green pasture. Really hard to find in a Middle Eastern landscape. Bit of the Waitrose of pasture land. Or is it the M&S? I'm not sure. Not just any grass. M&S grass. And then it's quiet waters. I don't know if you've ever tried to drink from a rushing stream. And you've got thirsty on a long walk. It's really just hard work, isn't it? It's just hard. You're going to get really wet. But if it's a still, quiet place of water, it's really easy to get a drink. So what this psalm is saying is, he makes me to lie down in places that are abundant with good food. And he takes me to the places where I can have a deep, still drink. And in our anxious and busy and turbulent world, where anxiety is off the scale, it's off the scale. We have another, we have a different pandemic, don't we? We have a pandemic of anxiety. This deep, quiet water which refreshes my soul. It's the peace that nothing else gets to. It's the water of life that goes deep within your being. One of the best poems I ever found that described this was written by a man called John S. Hoyland. And I've translated it brought it up into modern English. So I'm going to read you a poem that I discovered in a church. Was it on Bodmin Moor? I don't know, somewhere like that. So many years ago, and I wrote it on the back of a little postcard because I loved being in that space and place, and this poem kind of, brought it to life. So I'm going to read it to you. Again, if you want to close your eyes, do. Deep and silent and cool as a broad, still, tree-shaded river is the peace of your presence, God. You bring rest from the 1,000 problems of our busy life. We stop and plunge into your peace. God, you draw us into quiet places. Here no noise and worry can disturb the perfect contentment that only you can bring. You're like a good home, a place of refuge. You make us safe and you bring us peace. When we leave here and go back into the busy world, you are still with us. We can at any moment remember that you are there, your peace, presence, and love surrounding us. That same peace, presence, and love we experience now is on offer for all eternity when we follow you. He refreshes my soul. He, Jesus, refreshes my soul. And our world is looking for refreshment. Many people are just looking in so many other places, and we can be discipled by that world. It's really, really easy to follow the same. So there's no vacuum on discipleship. There's no vacuum on shepherding. Somebody is always shepherding us. Somebody is always actually leading us somewhere. We think in our modern world that we are autonomous individuals with the right to choose what we want to choose. But our very choices that we choose are often being shaped. So there's always somebody helping us to make a choice. And they're always discipling us somewhere. It's really interesting that we think, we have fooled ourselves into believing that we are autonomous individuals that can find a reality inside ourselves and determine from there who we are, what we are, and where we wish to go and be. But actually we don't realise who's shaping all the information that we receive to then make what we think are individualistic choices. There is never actually just a me making my decision in a vacuum. There is always somebody who is actually shepherding my thoughts. And it can either be the good shepherd or it can be the bad shepherd. It's actually very simple. A bit like a fairy tale, but it's not a fairy tale. It's actually reality. It's why we relate so easily to all the big fantasies and dramas when there is good and there's bad, because that's actually the dichotomy we live in. But the good shepherd is the one who actually wants to shepherd our thoughts, lead us into places, not just physical places and spaces, but mental spaces and places that will help us with green pastures and still waters. He wants to be the shepherd of all of our beings and refresh our souls. And he wants us to help other people to come into that place and presence. We can be shepherds of the other people around us in our lives. We can bring them into contact with this good shepherd and to the places where they will find life, not empty cisterns. There's that, I think it's Jeremiah, isn't it? When he says, you have dug empty cisterns and they are dry and empty. Because you've chased after other things. You've built another whole world for yourself. But this is going to deliver for you nothing. Nothing. It looks quite good for a bit. But it's not going to deliver you the promise. It will always be a short fix, like a dopamine high. But it won't give you long-lasting peace. I look back on the people who helped me. So when I saw my baptism video, I look back on the people who knew this shepherd and helped me to follow this shepherd. And I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful for the discipling they did of me in my life and the helping they did of me to find green pastures and know where to find quiet waters so that I could refresh my soul. And it leads on really beautifully, doesn't it, into guiding and leading. I don't know who or where you go for your guidance. So yesterday was a little bit manic. We had beds flying in every direction in our house. We had beds going out. We had beds coming in. We had 2 beds came in. 1 bed went out. You can see where the problem is. 1 other bed I tried to make out of the headboards of one and the baseboards of another. Then couldn't quite work it all out. And it didn't quite work because the slats were just a bit too short. Anyway. But then my father eventually woke up. He came upstairs, and he is a genius on these kind of things. He said, what you need is. So, I couldn't have got Google for. Google could not have solved that problem. You know how sometimes I used to ring my parents more, but now I look to Google. But on this one, if my dad hadn't walked into the room, I could not have solved the problem. And he was like, what you need is a piece of wood this big down either side, and then that will jam. I'm like, oh yeah. So we measured it up. It's 197 centimetres I need by 2.5 and 2 centimetres, to be precise. And then I will have made 1 full working bed out of 2 parts of 2 other beds. Don't ask. And who knows where the Allen keys are. But we live with quite a few different other people, so it's great fun. But it was a massive move day, people out, people in. Anyway. But that piece of guidance. So my parents, they guide me on more than just, a piece of wood 1972 by 2.5. But isn't it interesting? Who do you go to? Who do you go to for guidance in this world? And you need to choose. And how do you choose? How do you choose? You choose by watching and seeing. You choose by watching and seeing. And what's really interesting is he guides me along the right path for his name's sake. That is like that. It is for his glory. That Jesus has always guided me in the right path for the sake of his name and his glory and his reputation. We as his people carry his reputation. We are actually, his people are carrying his reputation. So as we go out in the world, we carry how he guides us and how we follow him. Actually, it reflects back onto the person who is shepherding us. We carry his reputation for his name's sake. And my parents have been amazing guides for me in my life. And I wonder if you could think who are yours. But what they've also shown me is the ultimate guide is that I follow the Good Shepherd. We go back to John 10. The sheep follow the Good Shepherd because he knows them by name, and they literally, they walk along behind. They're not chased or pushed. They choose and they walk along behind most of the time until they get lost. But they choose. We can choose to follow, or we can, actually, that looks quite nice over there. And then we're in a ravine. Because actually, the shepherd knows the path for our lives. I can see that my parents have walked a really good path. So it helps me to trust their guidance. Choose your guides well. What is their life like? Are they a well of peace, rest, wisdom? Have they lived a good life? And the ultimate guide is Jesus. And this is a great guidebook, isn't it? Nothing God will ever tell us will contradict this. Every day I read this, and every day God speaks. It's the best habit you'll ever have. And who guided me into that habit? My parents. My mother sat with me every night, one either side, and we read the Bible every day. And that's how you'll help someone to read the Bible every day, isn't it? It's who is the guide. And I think we've got to get more how can I put it? There just isn't a no guide. I feel like that's what we've got to say really clearly. There's not a Jesus, but actually the world is neutral. The world is so not neutral. It is toxic. It is toxic. It is the voice of a shepherd who does not want that sheep to live, who's hoping every sheep drops into a ravine and dies. That's the ultimate. That's where there's so much of that language, that's where that's where the shepherding is going. And so we are actually in a battle of the shepherds. We're in a battle of the shepherds. And it's who do we choose? But the good shepherd asks you just to choose, to listen to his voice and follow him. There's no coercion. There's no coercion from the good shepherd. And I love this, isn't it? Even though I walk through the darkest valley. This is interesting, isn't it? Because what it doesn't say is, if we did a little survey on people today, a lot of them would say, what I want to be is happy. Happy. Darkest valleys? Happy? Not so happy. Well, interestingly, okay, I think is probably what I'd say, because I will fear no evil as long as you are with me. There is no place or space. Nobody's life is going to not have a darkest valley. A few of them. That's how life is, isn't it? Life will have darkest valleys. The point in the darkest valleys is to know that the person you're following has already mapped the route. Jesus knows the route better than a sat-nav. Followed sat-nav this morning. It was very interesting. But better than a sat-nav is Jesus. He knows the route even in the darkest valley. Even in the darkest valley. He already knows the route. How amazing is that? You know when you walk and you need that route, don't you? I used to follow, my uncle used to lead walks in the most bizarre way in the Lake District. It was far more by kind of, he was about that. I think, well, we want to get up there, so I think we'll just go up there. And I'm like, I used to be with my map. Uncle, I'm just not sure that's where the path goes. I mean, it looks quite direct, but I think the path goes over, the path goes over here. Oh, okay, right, yeah, okay, we're going, right. But it was really entertaining because he'd have been fine, he'd have gambled up anything. But we, in the group were the people in the, slippy white shoes. They were not going to gamble up anything. Youth group days, great fun. And, who knows the route? Who knows the route? Even in the darkest valley, I will fear no evil. Have you, you can think back to your darkest valleys, and they're tough. They're rough. You're like, Lord, why am I here? Ever said that? Well, you're just going to have to follow me. Just going to have to walk it with me, aren't you? Just going to have to keep walking. Yes, it's dark. Could you turn the lights on then? No, we just have to go through. You have to follow me because I'm with you. And actually, the two things, think Gandalf for a moment. Rod and staff and the Psalm 23, but I think because it's been overused, it's beautiful that everybody knows it. It can be a bit, Jesus and his, staff and his rod and, we're walking through the daisies. I love the Lord of the Rings. Some of you will love the Lord of the Rings. And, when Gandalf, he says, I think it's the battle outside Helm's Deep, and he says, look to the east in 3 days, and then he comes over the hill, and he's brought a whole, they've gone out like die or not die, never mind, we're going to give it a shot, haven't they? If you're going to have to watch it. This isn't going to make any sense. Anyway, he comes over the top of it, and he has this staff. Okay, he's a great staff person. He has this staff. And when he raises his staff, it's a bit like kind of Gandalf meets Star Wars or something. This sort of almost laser field goes out. Have you seen it? Am I making any sense to anybody? Okay, so this almost laser field goes out of light. And it instantly changes the whole scene. It offers protection. It brings this incredible protection. And I think sometimes when we think of, we can't get our heads, because of the way perhaps sometimes he's depicted, who Jesus is. What is his staff like? Now, David knew, because he'd been on a hill and he'd fought, bears and lions and things like this. It's not a softly. We are actually, every single one of us sitting here today, we are in a battle. Just going to repeat that. We're in a battle. There's no this isn't some kind of, so we are in a battle. Every choice you make is part of that battle. You get the privilege and honor of fighting with Jesus. And he promises that even in the darkest valley, when it's not making any sense, he is there because he's got his staff. Ultimately, he can protect you. There is no evil that will stand against him. There is no evil that can stand against the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. And his name is Jesus. There isn't. And when we call on his name, the whole of heaven is backing us. Is that not incredible? But sometimes we sort of live in this, we live in the like this sort of, we've cut. So I feel in this psalm, the challenge for us as Christians is that we've cut our image of God down. We've cut our image of God down. And maybe the image of who we are and what we're up to, down to something small, sort of domesticated Jesus. Let's have a domesticated version. I'll just put him on the sofa there. I'll just go off and do over there. Yeah, he's doing fine. He doesn't want to be just there in a sort of domesticated version. We need to, he actually came to fight and he won. And your life matters. Everything we do is actually in this mega battle for eternity. How you relate to your friends and neighbours is part of the battle for eternity. You're like, Rachel, we live in Carshalton. I don't think you've quite walked down the road here. What are the enemies of Carshalton? You could probably name them. You could probably name them. I have people who they've been lulled probably into a self-sense of personal security. Going to have a little look at that as we go deeper. I should probably plough on. I have no idea what the time is. Anyway, I fear no evil. You are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. We have got a God who's so much bigger than Gandalf. Way, way more powerful. But sometimes we sort of muddle along, trying to sort it out ourselves, and we don't say, Jesus, I just need you into this situation. And I'm going to walk through the darkness, and I know it's horrendous, but I'm going to trust you. I'm just going to trust you. I'm just going to keep walking. You said to walk. It's not nice. I don't like it. My feet are in a bog. It's pretty uncomfortable, but you've told me to walk this way. I'm going to keep walking, and I'm going to trust you that I'll get through. Then how about these verses? You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil, and my cup overflows. Have you ever been anywhere really grand for a meal? This is like the King of Kings, the Lord of the Lords, the shepherd of the whole universe, saying he is preparing a table for you. My husband and I went to the Buckingham Palace once for a garden party. That was very nice. I borrowed a friend's large hat. And we had tea. And we had, jam and cream and sandwiches, and it was all very lovely. And somewhere distantly, it was in the days at Queen Elizabeth, there was the Queen. She was somewhere over there. You spotted her walk through. She went over there. I mean, she never actually talked to us. This shepherd, prepares a table for me and is with me. It's not a distant invite. This is a come to my table, sit at my table and share with me. This is a lavish table. Now, Middle Eastern culture on generosity, a little bit different, and wealth is a little bit different to ours. Here in the UK, when you get wealthy, you buy a bigger house and you put more space around you so that people can't get to you. You buy a nice flashy car, not to share it with people, but to drive down the road so people can see your lovely car. That's a bit of a, but that's kind of what we do sometimes with our wealth. We can put more space between us and the next person, and we can get a nicer car to drive past people. In Middle Eastern culture, what do you do with your wealth? You invite people to lavish food. You share your wealth to have a much more communal view of life. So you feed everybody. The more money you have, the more people you feed. The more people you feed. in the more lavish way that you can feed them. That's what you do with your money. You feed people. So this is what this is. You prepare a table before me. That's instantly where they'd have gone. Oh, this is a generous host preparing a big table for everybody to come. And we know that again, don't we, from again in Luke's Gospel, Luke 7, you know that Jesus, he talks, doesn't he, about the person who prepares a table and invites everybody in. Everybody gets invited to this table. And actually, this table, everybody is invited to this table. Everybody is invited to this table. Everybody is invited to the most generous, extraordinary table of God in the world. There isn't distance. There isn't separation. There's just ginormous. I love tables. We have a really big table. And we call it it's a community table, and I had it in my old flat, and now it's in our house. It's actually a bit small for this house. On Easter Sunday, we had an Easter feast, so we opened all our houses in our church, and everybody went to somebody's house for dinner. And people could just sign up. We had some really hilarious sign-ups. But anyway, it was great fun. I mean, there were people in the house, I'm like, I wonder where that person is. Well, I was just travelling, and I saw that you had an Easter feast, so I signed up. I'm like, well, you're welcome. You are welcome. That would be really Middle Eastern, isn't it? You are welcome to my table. So I thought we might get around 30. I began to think we might be hitting 40. We actually had 50 people for dinner on Easter Sunday. Anyway, we kind of ran out of some things, but fortunately Tesco's is just around the corner. So, and we had tables down the middle of our lounge. We have a lounge to a dining room thing. So the tables for the dining room, I had 5 tables out between the dining room and the lounge that I'd laid for dinner. I knew I could get about 30-something people round there. And every chair in the house. And then my dad had arrived with another table, but it was a table that had gone to the Lake District, where my sister lives, and returned. And I said, no, I think we could probably use that at some point, but we don't need it today, Dad. I've got enough tables. You're seeing how useful my father is now, aren't you? The Volvo estate of my father, very useful. So he's right, because I'm like, don't worry, Dad, we'll get that table out later. Like, we'll sort that out after we've done dinner for everybody. And I bought a rice cooker. Because our last rice cooker got melted by a member of my life group onto the halcyon hob. And so we've had to go for a bigger. I was like, well, let's not just buy a small, let's buy a bigger one. And when it arrived, I'm like, I have so overpowered. So we've got a 40-people rice cooker now. But now we can't just cook rice for the house, so we have to buy another rice. Anyway, so we filled up the 40-people rice cooker, and we cooked. Darren cooked a big meat chilli. I cooked a big veg. And we put those in the oven before we went to church. We baptised 6 people. All of those 6 people were with us. The lady who lives in Spain, all her Spanish family were over. They couldn't speak English. They were all around one end of the table. It was absolute chaos. And I suddenly realised, as people kept coming through the doors, and they weren't just in our house, they were kind of, lots of our homes opened for church. So we were trying to multiply this. I think we just got the more numbers, because we picked up all the anyone left over, should we say? And so I go, Dad sat down at this stage, and I'm like, we've run out of space. I'm like, Dad, could you go and get Dad? Dad, do you know that table? It's going to have to go in the hall. So he brought that table in, we found a pew from the top floor, and we managed to get another 10 people who ended up like the servants' quarters in the hall. So and then I had this stupid idea that we would make ice cream. When did I think ice cream sundaes was an easy dessert? Bring back crumble. Crumble easy. But ice cream sundaes. So we had ice cream, except the person who was bringing the cream hadn't bought any. So somebody else had to run off and buy like the whole stack of cream, and we made 50 ice cream sundaes on this table. So one person was cream, one person was sprinkles, one person was chopping up pineapples or whatever else. And it was the most hilarious ice cream sundaes. And they were just throwing them into the other room. You know, more! Okay, we're still going. More! Yeah, okay, we're still going. It's a bit more like that. This psalm, only more organised, I'm sure. I'm sure Jesus doesn't run out of cream. But it's the sheer scale of generosity that is being talked about in this psalm. Way over that. Because you're all thinking I'm a little mad, aren't you? But there is something about generosity that culture understands far better than our culture. Way better. And I think it's something about a call to the church here that I've seen of generous, ridiculous, crazy hospitality. Other than for the brethren, my mother understands generous hospitality. Don't know how many cakes she baked. But sheer scale of generous hospitality, opening our homes, is countercultural. People find it really peculiar in today's world that you would do that. But people feel part of something bigger because you've done something. So the generous table in the presence of my enemies. Who are the enemies? You've read this psalm a lot of times, people. Who are the enemies? Yeah, enemies of the gospel. And I think they're real people. So I think it's like he's inviting everyone. Some people don't actually want to be there. Yeah, Rachel, you just do your Easter feast. I'm going to KFC. I don't actually want to be at this table because this table requires an emptying of myself. It requires me knowing that I actually need the generosity of Jesus. It requires me knowing that I cannot do this life myself. It requires me identifying with the friends of Jesus. Who are the friends of Jesus? We know that again, don't we? If we look in the New Testament, who did Jesus eat and drink with, and who did he get into trouble for eating and drinking with? It's all over it, isn't it? Again, the leaders just can't quite get this. Why are you eating with tax collectors, like enemy number one, and sinners and prostitutes? What are you doing, Jesus? People don't want to share that kind of table. Oh, no, not interested in that kind of table. So I wonder if the enemies of Jesus are the people who can't quite recognize their need of Jesus, or that actually we're right in there with the tax collectors, sinners, and prostitutes. The hardest place I've ever stood. I don't know if I've ever told you this, but I'll tell you anyway. The hardest place I've ever stood is on a bridge in the red light district of Amsterdam. And the reason that's the hardest place I've ever stood in my life is that nobody could tell. I was probably 20. So nobody could identify that I was not a prostitute. So, it was complex. I sometimes needed rescuing. There was a lovely old homeless man on the corner, Hank, who once came and explained. So I'd be having to explain to people that I wasn't a prostitute. I was there to help the prostitutes. So they knew I was there because I loved them and I wanted to talk with them and I wanted to pray with them. But everybody else who walked past me did not know that. And the look in their eyes. So I felt two things. I understood how difficult it was to be a prostitute, because the look, people will praise you for a whole pile of things that you don't want to be appraised for. And then if they're not appraising you for that and they're just a normal person, they look on you like the scum of the earth. So you've got there's only really two options. Most people walk past you and there's two things. They're either kind of disgusted by you or they're looking at you as an object. It's the hardest place I've ever stood. I'm so sorry, but the invitation to this table is to be identified alongside those people, because they're the people Jesus hangs out with. Isn't it joyous? They're exactly the people Jesus hangs out with. Jesus hangs out with the people that no one else wants to hang out with. He hangs out with the person in the playground that nobody else will hang out with. That's a tough call. He takes the person on holiday that nobody else wants to take on holiday. He spends time with and drinks coffee with a person that nobody else wants to spend time with or drink coffee with, because he's Jesus. And he prepares a table. And not only just that, his table is lavish and generous and overflowing and extraordinary and beautiful. And he's willing to have me at his table and you at his table. I love this table. Anointing my head with oil, that's not to do with priestly anointing. It's just because everybody smelt. And so it's more like deodorant. But it's a very generous, like he's making us fit for the table. So he brings in the sinner and the prostitute and the tax collector, and then he makes us fit to sit at this extraordinary table. I'm no better, neither are you, than any of those people. We can have a false sense of our worth, can't we? Because we live I live in a nice world, and I can have a false sense of my worth. But I'm worth no more, and I'm worth no less than Jesus. And Jesus gives me my worth, and he gives me my value, and he gives me my love, and he says, share your table. Just as he is sharing that generous table, and my cup overflows. This is absurd, generous hospitality. How big is the God you pray to? How big is the God you pray to? When you pray, how big is the God you're praying to? How much does he really love you? I remember a man, you know how funny things you'd really remember from a talk? Can be really obscure, can't they? I remember this guy at one of our weekends away saying, how big is the cup you're bringing to Jesus to fill? Are you bringing a tiny coffee cup? You bring a little cup? Or are you trying to bring a cup the size of Wembley Stadium? And this is a bit like this. How big is the God that we have? How generous and lavish and extraordinarily wonderful. And this is all about our Jesus. He's the good shepherd. And our vision of him is what will shape the way we live our lives. He's loved me beyond anyone has loved me. His generosity towards me is bigger than anything I could ever imagine. No wonder he's my friend, and I want to introduce everybody else. I want everyone else round that table. Don't you? He doesn't mind where they are or what's happening in their lives. He desperately wants them round that table. And that is the offer we have. That's the offer you've got. You're offering that this afternoon in Messy Church. That generous, hospitable, this is Jesus and he loves you and he will change your life. I love Psalm 23. It's so simple. Because it promises, doesn't it, that surely his goodness and love will follow me all the days of my life. And I'll dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Dwell. I will stay. I will always be. This will never be separated. I will never be separated from this shepherd. And his generosity, his hospitality, his guidance, his love, his provision. Are we beginning to see why this poem has lasted 3,000 years? And he even invites his enemies to the table because he wants to bring about reconciliation even with them. He wants them in at the feast. You're invited. Judas sat and shared a table with Jesus. We should even be inviting our enemies round a table because we know this place is a place of reconciliation. And we know what this table is, don't we? It's got bread and it's got wine on it. It's a table with bread and wine. It's the very life and blood of the Good Shepherd. And we're back to John 10. I am the Good Shepherd because I lay down my life for the sheep. This table that was predicted, it will have been 2,000 years or so before Jesus, was actually the table of Jesus' sacrifice, where the ultimate generous hospitality happened. And he invites us in and says, this is my body and this is my blood. This is my very self. There is nothing more I can give you than my very self. Isn't that staggering? It's a psalm that's lived a long time. Let's pray. The Lord is my shepherd. I lack nothing. The Lord is my shepherd. I lack nothing. The Lord is my shepherd, and I lack nothing. The Lord is my shepherd. I lack nothing. Amen.